Hi, Misha here, and let's cover another Russian MiG, specifically the MiG-23 Flogger. And this can be one of the overlooked MiGs these days. Of course, you know the MiG-21, and we all know the MiG-29. The MiG-25 may be a little less known than those, but still, it's on people's radar. But the 23, it kind of falls in with like the MiG-17 and 19 as one of those interim aircraft that maybe get overlooked. But in actuality, this was the most mass-produced variable geometry, in other words, swing wing, military aircraft in history, with over 5,000 made. It was Soviet Russia's frontline fighter and interceptor with the VVS and PVO. It was exported to a number of nations. Some still fly them today. And it was made in several versions, including a few limited ground attack versions, and spawned the closely related MiG-27 besides. That said, it was an ambitious aircraft that maybe never really lived up to what the powers that be had hoped. So we have three models here, all in 1/72 scale diecast. Not many makers do the MiG-23. These are all Hobby Master. Over here we have the 23MS in the middle and in colorful colors. We have the MiG-23MF, kind of the quintessential version. And then over here we have the last major version, the 23MLD. So yeah, let's just talk about what exactly this aircraft was. Let's begin with Big Red here. This is actually from the Czech Republic Air Force, circa 1994. Upon its retirement, Czechoslovakia acquired the MiG-23 in several versions around 1978, and after the two nations split apart, the Czech Republic inherited the MiG-23 fleet. And this one here is of a pretty standard 23MF. Like I said, made right before it was retired in September of 1994. They would continue to fly the later 23ML and the 23UB until 1998, 1999, but they would retire the earlier 23MF at the end of 94. So backtracking quite a bit, what do we have here? Well, this aircraft dates back to the very early 1960s. The MiG Bureau had just released the MiG-19, which was their first supersonic aircraft. And by 1963, the Russian Air Force, the Russian government, wanted a new cutting-edge, high-tech aircraft. And they had quite a few steep requirements. It needed to have very good speed, range. It needed to be able to use the latest missiles, have the best radar. But it also needed to be able to operate from pretty rough, ad hoc, short-range airfields. Because the idea was, in case of war with the West, they wanted to be able to spread these out to work as interceptors and also dogfighters. That said, they valued speed much more than they did agility. And to get the short takeoff and landing performance, MiG had to come up with something. By the way, they also wanted this to be able to carry at least as much, if not more, armament than the MiG-21, which at that time could only carry 2 missiles and some guns. By 1965, there were basically two programs. You had the MiG-23, unofficially at least, the MiG-2301, and the 2311. The 2311 is what we ended up with here, with variable geometry wings. The 2301, just to mention it, was it was never meant to be a vertical takeoff and landing. It was always a short takeoff and landing, but it had two jet engines to give it very short takeoff and landing, so kind of like a Harrier, but not quite full-blown. And the 2301 would fly in April of 1967 and would even be shown off at a couple of air shows and be given the codename Faithless by the NATO. But in July of that same year, the 2311 first flew, quickly being designated as Flogger, a slightly more flattering name. And that's the one here with the variable geometry wings. And this seems to be what they kind of knew early on would be the ticket, because the Dash 01 really handled for shit. And those extra engines really were just dead weight except for takeoff. So the variable geometry wings, when they're swept back like this is for high-speed performance or low-altitude quick dashes to strike at a target. And then they would, or at least originally, be a middle position at about 45 degrees, about here. And this would just be for average flight, dogfighting, typical interception, just, general performance. And then fully out, this would be for short takeoff and landing and very fuel efficient cruising, endurance, loitering. And originally they would have 3 positions, and they would be manually set by the pilot. They were not set by any kind of computer. And they wanted this to have one afterburning engine, which you see. And also we had an all-moving tail, and each horizontal could move independently. I don't believe they move on this model. No. But the wings do, as you saw, and they actually are keyed together, so if you move one, they both move. They're very tight. Hobbymaster did a really good job with these. Originally, the 23 would carry 2 short-range air-to-air missiles under the fuselage and 2 medium to long-range kind of under the wing root, the glove there. It would be a single-seater, about 55, 56 feet long, and the wing sweep would be from just under 46 feet all the way out, just under 26 feet all the way in. And it would have a very powerful radar, at least eventually. The first production models, this was approved for production in December of 1967, and the first production model, known as the MiG-23S, or Flogger A, would come off the assembly line in May of 1969. But they only produce about 60 of these through 1970. The initial 23S was pretty much a pre-production model. It didn't have the full radar suite, and it really was pretty rough. In fact, they had a lot of reliability issues. They had a lot of maintenance issues. They had a lot of accidents. It was not really ready to go. The next version, sometimes called the 23SM or 23 1971, was made in 1971, and they would build about 100 of these. And this would be the next step forward. They would go to a larger wing, about 1/5 larger. They would improve the engine. They would get close to having the right radar. But really the full version is this here, the Flogger B, the MiG-23M. This was the first full production model. It had the first full radar, and this was important because it gave look-down, shoot-down capability. It was one of the first military aircraft in the world to have this. It wasn't the first, that would fall to the Phantom, but it was close. They once again revised the wing. They added the ability to carry a fuel tank under the fuselage. It could have a 23mm double-barrel cannon. One neat feature of the 23, when the gear were up, there's this fin below the engine there that would fold down to give it better high-speed performance. And when the gear were down, that fin would fold to the side so it wouldn't drag on the ground. Again, this was built for short or kind of rough airfield deployment. Once they really had a version that worked well for them, it had pretty good speed. It was able to get over Mach 2.3 and had a maximum altitude of about 61,000 feet. And it really could carry the best radar-guided, infrared, or heat-seeking missiles of the day. But it still was kind of a pig to handle, at least the 23M. Maneuverability wasn't great, but again, it was built more for speed, and it did achieve that. Many Russian pilots would kind of consider this superior to the F-4 Phantom, and later they would kind of equate it to the F-16. And it did have a limited ground attack capability. It could carry rocket pods, iron bombs, so on and so forth. But it was mostly an air-to-air. But its introduction to service was kind of marred, honestly. They really hoped to replace the MiG-21, and they started offering this for export. And that's where this exact version, the 23MF, comes from. The MF was made in several variants. They essentially had a slightly downgraded one for Warsaw Pact members like Czechoslovakia, with the big difference being they couldn't carry nuclear tactical bombs like the Soviet version. Then there was a further downgraded version that was sold outside of the Warsaw Pact. But otherwise, they were basically the same, 23M, 23MF. But despite its rocky start, by the 1970s, it was seeing service within and without the Soviet Union. So let's look at the other military-looking models. Here we have a MiG-23MS from the Libyan military. You've seen this before, but now it's with 100% more fin. When I did a video before on one, I forgot to attach the fin back here. This is issued in two pieces through Hobbymaster, so you can display it folded or down. So here it is. The 23 didn't get a lot of takers within the comm block. Not as Russia had hoped. So they began trying to export it to the Middle East and North Africa. And originally, they had developed this version, the 23MS. And this was a severely downgraded version. It had simplified avionics. Essentially, it used the radar system from the MiG-21, and therefore it was not capable of beyond visual range targeting and used older air-to-air missiles, again more or less for the MiG-21. It was such a downgrade that NATO classified it as Flogger E. even though it was a step down from the Flogger B, several were sent to Syria beginning in 1973. Egypt came in 1974, although this would be pretty short-lived because of the falling out with Russia. And then Libya would receive upwards of 170 total, although they would usually only fly about 20 at a time. And these aircraft would be used in all kinds of engagements throughout the late 70s and 80s. For example, Syria used some against Israel, and Lebanon used some against Egypt, and Egypt actually gave one or two to China, I think more or less just to spite Russia. This, of course, has the centerline fuel tank, and it has 4 old school MiG-21 Atoll missiles. Again, it was a pretty basic version, but it still had the speed and altitude. But eventually Russia would go ahead and start offering a downgraded version of the 23MF around 1978 to these nations. And so the 23MF would have replaced the 23MS. Another major user was Iraq, that flew these both in the air-to-air and air-to-ground role during the Iran-Iraq War. And would continue to fly them throughout Desert Storm, but several would be lost during that war to the Allied forces. 40 to 45 were destroyed, and another 10 to 12 more were damaged. The MiG-23 was still in Iraqi service during the Second War in 2003, but none ever took off. Most were either destroyed or just simply never engaged. Libya, though, would continue to fly some, although many were in pretty rough shape, and these were used by both sides during the Civil War in 2011. Some COMBLOC nations would fly the 23, for example, Poland, Bulgaria, East Germany, and as I mentioned, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic briefly. But really it was mostly used by Russia's VVS and then soon the PVO. You would see service there. But yeah, this is a neat model. This was my first 23. And it has, of course, the fully moving wings, same as the other one. Like I said, they're pretty stiff, which is good. On these models, because of how thin everything is with the 23, again, designed for speed. The wings are polymer plastic, and the tail horizontals are, I lie, they're metal. Okay, the tail is all metal, but the wings are plastic. And Hobbymaster is happy to do metal wings on their variable geometry aircraft like the F-111 and F-14, but if they made these from metal, they'd be too thick and people would complain. Overall, it's a pretty light model for its size. I mean, it has some heft, but it's just such a thin, kind of dagger-shaped aircraft. Again, this has the four missiles and the tank underneath. And this was actually the second model Hobbymaster ever did, because kind of the Libyan 23s are pretty iconic. In 1989, they quote-unquote engaged American F-14s, but it did not go well for them at all. The 23MS was perhaps on par with the F-4, but it was outclassed by the F-16, certainly the F-15 and the F-14. I think, you know, a lot of communist nations looked at this. They had the MiG-21. They were pretty happy with it. It was a simple aircraft. It was easy to work on. It was pretty affordable, cheap, easy to maintain. They looked at the 23. At least in the early 70s, they didn't see a huge step up from the 21, but they did see a huge step in operating cost and complications. So I think that's why many of them kind of passed on it, at least for a while. So a lot of nations jumped straight from the 21 to the 29 because, especially in the beginning here, it really just wasn't a great dogfighter. It could do it, but it was meant more as an interceptor and sacrificed a lot for speed. Again, we're on one engine too, so. But in the late 70s, Russia did begin working on improved versions, and they really would give the aircraft a lot more credibility. In 1976, the MiG Bureau first test flew kind of the second generation, I suppose you would say, in this family. And in 1978, this new version would go into production. For the Russian Air Force, the VVS, there would be the MiG-23ML, and the L was essentially for lightened. They shaved over 2,700 pounds off the airframe. They gave it a more modern and lighter weight radar. They gave it the ability to use newer weapons, also to mount gun pods under the little wing stations. And they improved the cockpit instrumentation a bit. And other, just, uprated engine a bit, just little refinements to try to improve the situation. And they would make a special version for the PVO. It was more of a dedicated air interceptor, air defense aircraft that had a data link and a pretty autonomous autopilot, I guess you would say. And these would be delivered. The PVO would get about 500. And then in 1982, the VVS's MLs would be updated to this version here, the MLD. And this version was designed to give better aerodynamics, better maneuverability, to try to make it a bit more into a dogfighter. They also integrated new weapons, including the first air-to-surface guided missile. And they also started being able to offer these with the double pylons here for 2 short-range air-to-surface missiles as opposed to 1, increasing the total armament to 6. By the way, these could carry additional fuel tanks on the wings, but if they did this, these are basically transit tanks. They weren't for combat, and the wings had to be fixed in position. That's another thing they integrated into the design, was a 4th wing position at 33 degrees to try to split the difference between the fully swept back high speed and the intermediate, to try to give it a better fighter system. They also improved the afterburn thrust of the engine. The whole point with the MLD was better electronic countermeasures, better defense like chaff and flare, better nav systems, just better. The original ML and the P, as it was known for the POV, these are known as the Flogger G, And the final version, the MLD, was known as the Flogger, there we go, Flogger, the Flogger K. Now, the Ks used by Russia were all updates of their existing MLs, and they would update around 600, 650. But they didn't have purpose-built MLDs for export, although there would be a few structural differences. On this model here, you can tell it's ML MLD because of the back here. It's also a little different under here. And again, it features the newer ordnance. It also has the newer nose styling. It's worth pointing out that the downgraded MS had a shorter nose because of the less sophisticated radar than either the regular M, the MF, or the later ML series. There's also the 23MLA. There was kind of an interim between these, but anyway. So the MiG-23 was the primary air defense interceptor in the 1980s. And for the Russian Air Force, they were heavily used in Afghanistan between 1983 and around 1988. They were used as escort for their aircraft, and they were used as fighters against F-16s sometimes. But they were also used as ground attackers, hitting targets. Now, they had been working on kind of a ground attack program. It started off with the MiG-23B that evolved into the 23BM and 23BN. And these are very closely related aircraft. They just had a few different pieces of kit, including a laser designator. They also had additional armor for the cockpit, especially the windshield. And they had uprated engines for better low altitude performance, but essentially they were the same. But the 23BM would be the basis for the MiG-27, and on and on. These received designations such as Flogger D and later Flogger F, just to fill in the gaps there. The I guess we'll call it the air defense version, or that's not really right either. The standard MLD production ended in '84, and then the last of the ground attacker versions would be delivered in 1985. By which time, of course, the newer MiG-29 was online, and the Sukhoi Su-27 was coming online. And so kind of the next generation. The MiG-23 is considered a third generation aircraft because it does have beyond visual range and look down, shoot down. But the MiG-29 was solidly fourth generation technology. So they were ready to go. Even though the MiG-29 was coming online, these would still be in the Russian Air Force between 91 and 92. They'd have about 1,500 in service. But after the budget cuts following the Cold War, these were drawn down because they were going to focus more on twin-engine jets, kind of letting the older single engines go by the wayside. It's worth pointing out that MiG did offer an upgrade program known as the MiG-23/98, hoping to give it new technology like a glass cockpit. And they were hoping to get customers interested, people that were still operating the MiG-23. The problem is budget. No one really had the budget, and no one, if they did, wanted to put money into this aircraft. It was aging technology, and either was perfectly fine as it was for them, or they were ready just to retire it altogether. So even though an upgrade modernization package was offered, they were no takers. Now, interestingly, the MiG-21, on the other hand, definitely was receiving modernizations in the 1990s. So in Russia, the MiG-23 was gradually kind of retired out of service as airframes wore out and maintenance costs went up. And then it was officially pulled on May 1st, 1998. And elsewhere around the world, especially in the Warsaw Pact, most nations were retiring their leftover MiG-23s around the same time. Kind of the 96 to 2004 window was the time these were being phased out. Although there were a few users still. Like I said, Iraq would have some until after the fall of the Saddam regime, and Libya would have some. But again, these were in pretty rough shape by 2011. A few may still be flying today. I'm not really aware. But if so, they're definitely in more backwater areas. And I don't mean to be disparaging of this aircraft. It certainly was made on a budget. Cost a lot less than American. I mean, for a single engine aircraft to get up to Mach 2.3 plus, and to have look down, shoot down capability with 4 to 6 missiles, that's nothing to sneeze at. And it was able to acquit itself quite effectively in Afghanistan. Once they got to the ML and MLDs, the aircraft had kind of matured and shown itself to be capable, if not extraordinary. And so I think that's why it kind of maybe falls by the wayside these days compared to other more famous MiGs. They had ambition when they set out in the 1960s. I'm not going to say that they failed, but they really wanted too much from it based on the technology available in the 1960s. And by the time that tech was mature, new tech would already come along. And so you end up with like the MiG-29. And again, this is when the Sukhoi really starts to kind of take over from MiG, at least for the larger, more strategic aircraft. As far as this Hobbymaster model, it's pretty neat. This is the first MLD that they've done. In fact, they've only done one other, I believe, plus an ML. There are quite a few small but noticeable differences between this and the MS. Like I said, the nose is shorter on the MS. And even between the MS over there and the MF here, there are some differences. Just little pieces of kit. And I don't know, I just thought it would be kind of fun to have a clean version of this. Sorry, I picked up the wrong one, didn't I? Apologize. I mixed them up. I like having fun with myself. But anyway. Neat aircraft. You know what I meant. I think you can probably tell the giant red one. But I don't know, I just thought it was fun. They have not done many 23 variants. I think they've only done 9 or 10. And I don't know that anyone else has done them. I don't think Corgi has. Yeah, noticeably longer nose on that one compared to this one. Still neat though. So what do you think? Do you like the MiG-23? Do you like swing wings? I kind of do. It's a neat design. I like the giant engine. And that is the very rapier-like appearance. It's just very thin, very sleek. And this one here is a model from Afghanistan, I think around 1988, now maybe 1987. It might be kind of cool if they do a MiG-27 variant one day with ground ordnance, but If they don't, it's nice that we have what many would consider the ultimate fighter version here, for whatever that's worth. And the MiG-23MLD it had a lot better performance, handling. It was really the first one that pilots, at least dogfighters, enjoyed. Interestingly, while the VVS kind of had a mixed reputation for this plane, the POV, which had very different requirements, liked it a lot more. But then again, they were thinking about intercepting large bombers, not small, fast, nimble fighters. Anyway, just been trying to cover some fun things. Let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, if you could, please like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.